minutes while people are entering the room, and then we'll get started shortly. For those who've just entered, we're going to just start in the next couple of minutes. Yeah, just waiting for everyone else to join the room. Okay, brilliant. I think most people have joined. So happy New Year, everyone, and welcome to our first Dalton Seminar of the year. It's our great pleasure to welcome lawyer Maroof Mittha, who has recently completed his LLM in International Energy Law and Policy from the Centre for Energy, Petroleum, Minerals Law and Policy at the University of Dundee. Earlier to this, he's practiced as a commercial and corporate lawyer, and he's deeply invested in legal and policy developments in nuclear energy. He's going to be talking to us today about Hinkley Point C from a legal perspective. So it's my pleasure to pass it over to Maroof.
Thank you, Anika. Good afternoon, everyone. And this is a great opportunity, and I'm really thankful to speak on the issue. Today, we'll be talking about the case Hinkley Point C. But before that, I would try to lay out a context of why it is important in the EU legal framework and international legal framework. So so today I would be talking about the Atoms for Peace program and how it laid down the foundation of international nuclear legal framework, and how energy policy is important to how nuclear is important in the energy policy, and what role nuclear can play in the energy transition and energy policy. On the then I'll go on talking about the Hinkley Point C, or what were the facts, what were the contentious issues, and how the court and what did the court lay down as a law. Very briefly, I would also talk about the post-Brexit European nuclear market. The emphasis would be how UK is being affected by it, and what measures have been taken to just follow up and streamline the vacuum created by the by the absence of legal regime. So straight away, this is the famous speech of the President Eisenhower of the United States of America, who just laid down, who just emphasized for the very first time internationally in the United Nations General Assembly, that the peaceful power from atomic energy can play a very significant role, and this can help the transformation into universal, efficient, and economic usage. This speech on the floor of United Nations General Assembly laid down this. It was followed by the establishment of International Atomic Energy Agency, which is an independent intergovernmental science and technology based organization for nuclear cooperation. And the cooperation is mainly focused on research and technical development, and safety, and non-proliferation legal regimes. It also assess its member states in planning for and using nuclear science and technology for various peaceful purposes, including the generation of electricity. Then it was also followed by on the European theater, a treaty establishing the European Atomic Energy Community. It is also known as the Euratom Treaty. It was the main purposes of the treaty was to promote research and disseminate technical information. The focus was also to set uniform safety standards to protect the public and industry workers, to facilitate research, and to ensure civil nuclear materials are not diverted to other uses. So the purpose and mandate of both the International Atomic Energy Agency and this Euratom Treaty were somewhat similar, but the jurisdictions were different. The Atomic Energy Agency was more international, and this Euratom Treaty was more regional. And what immediately the nuclear program or civil nuclear program didn't become automatically commercially available or commercially very successful. The nuclear and the oil crisis of 1973 led to exposure or bringing nuclear as into the limelight, and the industrialized oil importing countries found nuclear as a primary candidate for its reserves being widely distributed throughout the globe. And various countries like UK, United Kingdom, United States, and France, they embarked on the journey of establishing very vigorous, enormous programs about the nuclear share in total energy production. So in 1980s, just a decade after the oil crisis, the contribution of nuclear in the France energy production was from 7% to 20% in 1980, just within a decade. And now it stands at about 3/4 of the total energy production in France. So why the energy policy is facing a very important, a very significant time frame. The emphasis has been on the clean energy transition. The stepping stone for this was the Paris Agreement, and that just laid down the principle and imposed a legal obligation on the states that they should contain, and they were a legal obligation on the nations that the global average temperature should be well below 2 degrees Celsius, and the efforts would be pursued to contain it below 1.5 degrees Celsius. And the main they were to devise adaptation and mitigation strategies from carbon dominant energy industry to low carbon or clean sources. As you can see, that electricity and heat contributes about 14 billion ton of carbon dioxide worldwide, and followed by the transport and other sectors. But the global primary, and this energy production is heavily dominated by the fossil fuels. 84.3% of global energy comes from the fossil fuels, and rest of 15.7% comes from low carbon sources, with nuclear contributing about 4.3% of the entire energy basket. So this energy transition had already been indicated by the IPCC reports. One report in 1990, it suggested that it had a detailed analysis and detailed insight on why this was really important, and there should be strategies in place and developed to deal with the phenomenon of highly or carbon dominant energy resources or carbon dominant energy sector to clean sources. Uh, and it became it became apparent in very soon that there are no obvious substitution options, because like energy policy is faced by three different driving factors. One is the economy, the other is politics, and one is the environment. The latest one is the environment. It should be energy security. It like all the consumers all should have the energy at affordable cost, and it should also be clean. The Paris Agreement has made it a legal obligation that the energy should be clean, or there should be some mechanism that and some strategy that it should move toward cleaner sources, not immediately, but with the passage of time. So every nation has submitted their national plans and mitigation strategies to deal with and to go towards, or explaining their pathways towards clean energy solutions. Why nuclear power emerged as a potential solution, or a potential player in the energy policy framework? Because it provides the baseload energy, that is a specific portion of the energy required, that should be predictable, and that should be continuously supplied. The and that nuclear has the potential to provide the baseload supply. It should one other important thing is that important thing to be considered, that nuclear has advantage of that it can provide the firm power. It doesn't have the variability as is the problem of other renewable energy sources. It is not dependent on the wind to blow or the sun to shine. Once you switch on the button, you can have the energy for as much of time as you want. So the other that is one more important, very significant factor is the more on a levelized basis, or on a levelized cost of electricity. Nuclear power is an economic source of electricity generation, and on the project lifespan, it provides a relatively cheaper electricity. But it does have it does have the upfront cost. It does have various other factors as well that make it not very cheap. The other was the uranium reserves are sufficient to support the current fleet of nuclear plants, and they are. It has been reported that they are available for the identified nuclear reserves are able to support the current nuclear fleet for the next 2 decades, even in the very high demand scenarios. These are very safe figures. And the identified and estimated sources of thorium across the globe have been reported to be 3.6 million tons. And that is the diversity, the abundance of reserves is one factor that makes it interesting. for the policymakers. And this one other aspect that makes it very interesting for the policymakers is the fuel efficiency and cost. There have been reports by the International Atomic Energy Agency that 1 kilogram of uranium produces about 50,000 kilowatts per hour of electricity, as compared to 1 kilogram of coal and oil, which only the difference is remarkable. And this fuel efficiency is a very important aspect. And since the fuel efficiency is high, the cost of transport of these this fuel is very minimum as compared to other fuel sources. This, I'm talking about the cost of transport. Even otherwise, in a nuclear power plant, the fuel cost remains only 10 to 16% of the total cost. Although currently there is an ongoing issue in the Kazakhstan, which supplies almost 55% of the world uranium supply, and but still they play only 10 to 16% of the total cost of electricity. Then one important aspect that has to be considered, that has been very interesting for the policymakers, is that it provides the cost efficient hydrogen. Particular set of these some of the hydrogen produced from energy produced from the nuclear power plants can produce hydrogen in less than $3.5 per kg of the hydrogen. So nuclear can also be used for nuclear has the potential to be used for producing other clean energy sources. So these are some of the factors that makes nuclear very interesting and very adaptable, or a prominent choice for policymakers. But there are issues with the government. But there are some issues that I would talk about later in the present, which makes it not very popular. This is one other aspect, that diversification and land use. Like for a land requirement per 1,000 megawatts of capacity, that like requires 3.3 square kilometer for 90% capacity of a nuclear power plant, like as compared to a solar and wind, which like require for producing 1,000 megawatts of capacity, they require 673 and 932. Say they require the difference is remarkable for the land use, in the context of land use as well. So then come the important question: how this nuclear power becomes nuclear powers becomes relevant, or becomes or fit in the context of EU energy policy. As mentioned earlier, the Euratom Treaty principally deals with the international cooperation between the European countries for the development of nuclear energy, and it also lays down the obligation of providing the necessary conditions for expeditious establishment and growth of nuclear industries. But the current legal framework for economic activity in European region is governed by the Treaty for Functioning of the European Union. This treaty for functioning of the European Union lays down the principles of market economy on the basis of competition and liberalization. So there would not be a favorite in this economic activity in European market. So the principles now the principles in the Treaty for Functioning of the European Union allows the member states to have preference of energy source in the energy mix, but there are talks about the common energy policy, and these common energy policy would be based on the principles of providing to ensure the energy security, promoting efficient energy, renewables, and the interconnection of energy networks. So the energy policy has developed from a national choice to a more common or wider energy policy, European energy policy. And the focus has been the development of reliable, sustainable energy policy focused more on the renewables. But the provisions of Euratom Treaty are still applicable. They have not been abandoned, and the nuclear policies of but the nuclear policies of of the European Union countries are more national, and they are not guided by the European Union itself. There are specific legislation and legal directives about the about the internal market and electricity supply, and about the energy security. And these directives govern or they are about the oil supply within the European market. Now, let's Hinkley Point C. This was the most important nuclear power plant activity happening in Europe in 2013. It was made contentious. It was condemned by the Austrian government, and one of the subsidizing agreements, or the measures taken by the UK government were challenged by the Austrian government in this case. One of the UK government of the government of UK entered an arrangement with the generation company, a subsidiary of EDF. The arrangement was to offer 3 supporting measures for the nuclear plant. One was a contract for difference. That was a revenue support based on predetermined strike price. And the other was an agreement of the Secretary of State for compensation in case of early plant closure due to political reasons. And the third was a credit guarantee for the debt it would issue for the timely payment of principal amount and interest on the qualifying debt. And these measures were notified to the European Commission as required by law. But after a contested investigation, the European Commission found them to be compatible with existing market regulations. But this contentiousness had increased this project cost from 16 million pounds to 24 when the investigation was initially concluded. But after the conclusion of investigation, the government of Austria filed a claim before the European General Court, and it contested the Commission's adoption of the UK's state aid measures. The arguments advanced by the Austrian government were that the Commission erred in concluding that the state measures by the UK were necessary. They emphasized that there was no market failure indicated, or there was no evidence of market failure, so there is no there was the state aid measures were not required. They also emphasized that the nuclear market was not a different market than the energy market. So and there was a lot of investment opportunities available in the energy market. So these issues, so these state aid measures were not required under the were not required as such, and they were not valid as a state aid measures. But the court in response to the after deliberation on these objections, rejected these arguments and held that the market failure had not been stated as a precondition under the law, and hence the argument would not stand. The court also acknowledged the inherent risks associated with the power plant projects. That was about the high upfront costs, uncertainty in the wholesale price, and the construction delays. Due to these factors, the private investment is not readily available to the nuclear power plants, and therefore the court held that the state can intervene and state can provide assistance to the or provide mechanisms to the nuclear power plants under the provide subsidies and mechanisms and legal aid or state aid to these nuclear power plants. The court also held that the since UK and other European governments are signatory to the Euratom Treaty, therefore this any sort of measure for any sort of state aid measure for the nuclear development would be covered as a public interest. After this, the Hinkley Point C, it allowed the state aid measures originally planned by the UK government. The appeal against the decision of the European Court was also dismissed, and hence there's no legal complication now involved in the Hinkley Point C. But after this, now the law and now the situation in the European jurisprudence is as such that the state aid measures aimed at promoting nuclear industry should be in line with the objectives of the Euratom Treaty. If they are in line with the Euratom Treaty, the the other regime or the TFEU regime law would not be imported to, would not be an impediment for state aid measures. There was another issue with there is no common nuclear policy, hence, but there is common policy, or there is common directive for the promotion of and promotion of the nuclear renewable energy. But the European Commission, a recent update is, or a recent development in this is that in this regard is that the taxonomy regulations have been approved by the Commission, and they have been sent to these to the member governments, and they would give their opinion that whether nuclear is a sustainable activity. Once it has been determined by the European Commission and the European Parliament that the nuclear is a sustainable activity, there is expected more investment is expected in the nuclear industry, in the nuclear industry. And these taxonomy regulations, they complement the sustainable finance disclosure regulations and the low carbon benchmark regulations, and they would also help the investors determine the environmentally sustainable activities or invest into environmentally sustainable activities. How UK was affected by the Brexit, that is I would just very briefly comment on that. The withdrawal was carried out in 2020. The literature is not available about the economic impacts of this, is not very widely available on the about the economic impacts, but there are there were supposed to be significant legal and regulatory gaps for nuclear safety applicable under the Euratom Treaty, because UK had always been UK had been the founding members of the European Union, and there was no space when when it withdraws from the European Union, and it remains part of the Euratom Treaty, because both treaties work in complement with each other. So UK had to sign a mutual agreement with a bilateral agreement with the European Union, just saying that to ensure that it doesn't face the it doesn't face the legal issues or supply issues with the with the nuclear reserves. So and the bilateral agreement entered with the European Union covers the cooperation for supply and transfer of nuclear technology, nuclear material, nuclear fuel cycle, spent fuel and radioactive waste, safety and radiation protection, and mm, other development and enrichment of uranium sources. Besides this agreement, the UK had to separately enter into bilateral agreements with Australia and Japan, with which, when it was part of the European Union, it was and being part of the Euratom Treaty, it was already it was part of the bilateral agreements between the Euratom community and Japan and Australia. There another legal gap that could have emerged after the withdrawal of UK from the Euratom Treaty and European Union, was about the gap in the nuclear safeguards. The UK had to issue, or it has to pass a law about the Nuclear Safeguards Act in 2018 to cover up the cover up the legal vacuum that emerged after this withdrawal. But though it has nuclear has its potential as a clean energy source, as a clean power source, and due to various factors that I shared with you, and it is considered a major significant player in the decarbonization pathways, but there are still issues which have to be dealt with, and which have, some of them are dependent on the technological advancement, and the other some of them are dependent on the finance and investment. uh, the radioactive waste management is one issue that has to be dealt with. The states are under the international law. The states are responsible for radioactive waste management and decommissioning of a nuclear power plant, but states had already. But the important question here, under the environmental law, international environmental law, it is usually the polluter that pays for the pollution it causes, and in that case, in the nuclear power plant, it is generally the operator. So the question about how the nuclear power plant operator would be made responsible for, or could be made responsible to share these costs about radioactive waste management and decommissioning. There have been some mechanism, but there is no universal legal acceptable rule on that. So these are some of the standing issues that need to be dealt with. And yeah, thank you so much for your patience. I hope this has been useful for you. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask.
Thank you so much, Maroof. That was a really excellent talk. If anyone has any questions in Zoom, please post them in the chat or raise your hand. And on YouTube, if you're watching on YouTube, please just post them in the YouTube chat and we'll come to you. We've had one in the Zoom chat from Angela, which asks, in your costing figures, have you included 1, the end of life decommissioning costs, 2, initial capex to build, 3, ongoing compliance costs, e.g. to track and report fuel, uranium import and output, so nothing is missing or diverted for non-peaceful uses? As I recall, Hinkley Point was controversial in the UK some years ago when Theresa May was PM, partly because of the per unit cost of power generated was projected to be much higher than what was then available in the UK. Has this changed? So that's quite a few questions in there. So I don't know if you want to take one or all of them, Maroof. Yeah.
Thank you, Angela. There are some issues that I mentioned that have to be dealt with. One of them is about the issue about the decommissioning costs. Currently, the position is under the international law, it is the state that is responsible for decommissioning and radioactive waste management. But different mechanisms have been devised by the governments of France, Germany, and United Kingdom. But there is to be the gap is still there, and it has to be dealt in, and it has to be dealt with. In looking to your other question, yep.
So I'll just read it out just because the people on YouTube can't see it. So Angela's also followed up with saying, assuming a functioning and efficient carbon market develops, do you have any thoughts or sense of the projected new revenue stream that an NPP can look forward to in terms of selling or monetizing the zero carbon energy it generates? Is that significant or meaningful enough to enhance the economic viability of NPPs?
Yes, after the applicability of the emission trading system and the zero carbon emissions of the nuclear power plants, it is expected that it would help nuclear power investment in nuclear power plant, because it is a carbon zero technology, or it emits the minimum of the carbon, and it would play a critical role in development of and promotion of the nuclear power plants and nuclear industry. I hope it answers your question. I'm just getting back to your first question. Yes, the initial capex to build, no, these figures have been. Can you please be more specific? What figures are you talking about? What figures I have quoted about that you're referring to?
While we wait for Angela to get back, I had a couple of questions in the meantime, if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
So the first one was actually, it was really interesting to see the figures about France at the beginning, that in one decade they went from 7% to 20% nuclear as part of their energy mix, and they now have 75% some decades later. From your perspective, or from the legal perspective, do you think this is possible to recreate in other countries, or do you think this was something very specific to the time? I think you said it was in the 70s that they had that jump in one decade of 13%. Would it be possible to recreate this for other countries now from a legal perspective?
If we talk about the developing countries, I think the upfront cost and the capex involved in the nuclear industrial programs that doesn't make it very affordable for the developing countries right now, but we have to look into that. But there is another important aspect about the development of nuclear power industry, that is its consideration as an environment friendly power source, and its reliability. These two factors play an important role in driving the policymakers to consider nuclear as an important player in the decarbonization pathways, and as compared to the other renewable sources. And yeah, that's pretty much it is possible, and but the cost involved in the upfront cost involved in this make it pretty difficult for the developing countries without the international support to develop programs, develop enormous atomic programs. I hope
Brilliant.
this satisfies you. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I had one more and then I will come to Ted's question. So the other one was about, you mentioned that the UK have signed bilateral agreements or working on bilateral agreements with Australia and Japan. Again, maybe this is an ignorant question. So Australia doesn't have any nuclear plants, but they have a lot of uranium reserves, is my understanding. Yeah. Japan has nuclear power plants, but I had a feeling that they were trying to move away from nuclear. The public perception wasn't so positive, but does this bilateral agreement give kind of an indication that perhaps things will turn the other way and they're going to start investing more in nuclear technologies?
These agreements were already in place with when UK was part of the Euratom treaty or Euratom community. After UK parted with the Euratom treaty, these bilateral agreements have to be separately made with with Japan and Australia. So the level of cooperation it was having with these two governments would stay the same after the Brexit. That was the main purpose. Obviously, the public perception would depend on the political factors and various other factors and the policy choices of these governments. But yeah, generally after the COP26, it has become apparent that the world would have to consider nuclear as a prominent player in the for decarbonization and transition to low carbon economies.
Fantastic, thank you. So Ted has sent a question in the chat. Do you think that the regulated asset base RAB model passed this week in the UK will be enough to promote significant investment in nuclear new build?
Yes, the regulated asset-based model, it provides this security and guarantee to the power plant operator. Yeah, it would have its investment back in terms of profit. So apparently this is a good this appears to be a good working model, but still yeah, apparently it is a good working model, and it has been advocated so much by the government that yeah, we have to look into it and we have to consider it for the serious investment and for the investment that involved this heavy stake.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Does anyone have any further questions, either in Zoom or YouTube? Just checking the YouTube chat, or if anyone's got their hand raised. No, if not, then I would like to thank Maroof again for a really interesting talk and some very interesting discussions as well afterwards. If anyone thinks of any questions afterwards, please feel free to get in touch. And yeah, thank you everyone for attending, and thank you to Maroof, our speaker.
Thank you, Anika, and thank you everyone for listening to me. Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks everyone, take care.